Thank you so much for coming on this humid, balmy summer day in New York. I wanted to welcome all of you guys for coming to this incredible panel discussion between Kota Ezawa, Julian NoiseCat, and Dr. Audra Simpson. I'm just going to introduce Dr. Audra Simpson, who will then introduce the other panelists. Dr. Audra Simpson is a political anthropologist whose work is focused on contextualizing the forces and consequences of governance through time, space, and objects. Her research and writing is rooted in Indigenous politics in the U.S. and Canada and crosses the fields of anthropology, Indigenous studies, American and Canadian studies, gender and sexuality studies, as well as politics. Her recent research is a genealogy of effective governance and extraction across the U.S. and Canada, and she's currently a professor at Columbia University in commemorated psychology.
Thank you so much. I'm simply delighted to be here. As you just heard, I'm a political anthropologist, and the kind of work that and materials that I work with are not these. So it's always a wonderful invitation when it comes from the artist and when it comes from a former student to use another muscle group and to think with these people. So I will first introduce these artists, and then I have some framing comments and some questions that they also have, and we will deal with those questions. They will talk to each other or answer the questions, enter into a conversation, and then we'll open this up to you. Sitting to my left is Julian Brave NoiseCat. Julian, if you do not know, is a writer. He's an Oscar-nominated filmmaker. He's a champion powwow dancer, and he is a lifelong student of Salish art and history. His first documentary, if you have not seen it, please run, is entitled Sugar Cane. It's directed alongside Emily Cassie. It follows an investigation into the abuse and missing children at the Indian residential school that NoiseCat's family was sent to near Williams Lake, British Columbia. It premiered at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival, where NoiseCat and Cassie won the directing award in the U.S. documentary competition. The film was recognized with 40 awards. Julian, how old are you? He's 32. With 40 awards, including Best Documentary from the National Board of Review, and was nominated for a Peabody and an Academy Award. NoiseCat's first book, We Survived the Night, will be published by Alfred A. Knopf in October 2025, as well as Penguin Random House Canada, Profile Books in the UK, and Commonwealth Albin Michel in France, and Aufbau Verlag in Germany. Julian holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors, which he doesn't put on his website, from Columbia University, and a Master of Arts in History from Oxford. He is a citizen of Canada Band. Sitting to the left of Julian is Kota Ezawa, who is a German-Japanese artist, naturalized American now, eh, Kota? I'm curious about that, okay. Living in Oakland, California. He earned his MFA from Stanford and has an extensive body of work that speaks to, quote, his long interest in the cultural weight of photography. An interest that prompts questions in the medium's validity as a mediator of actual events and experiences. He takes up these questions in mediation by a method, I'm characterizing your work now, I hope you don't mind, a method of reduction, reducing complex visual information to its most essential, what he has called two-dimensional elements. In 2025, Ezawa was the focus of a landmark solo exhibition at the Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture, titled Kota Ezawa Here and There, Now and Then. And this is the piece that was there, am I right? Okay. In 2019, his work was included in the Whitney Biennale at the Whitney Museum of And in 2017, he was featured in the traveling exhibition, which just sounds incredible, Leonard Cohen, A Crack in Everything, organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal. He has been a part of solo and group shows all over the world, and his work may be found in museums, it may be found in our New York City Public Library, and in art galleries all over the world. He studied at the Kunstakademie Düsseldorf. When I used to drink, I used to think I could speak German. It's all right, and I'm so. At the San Francisco Art Institute before getting his MFA from Stanford. He lives and works now in Oakland, California. So those are these two incredible interlocutors of this work and perhaps of this moment. I have some framing comments for the work that is before you. I hope you got to take a look at it or you'll take it in right now. This is what I will say. You're both to me dealing with history. The history of the present, the history of the past. You can deal with it differently. I see an archiving function in your work, in both of your bodies of work. I've tried to immerse myself as much as I could in your work. Kota, the moments that you've seized upon in your work to slow down, to still, and to freeze, which you characterized in one interview as reduction. And we could talk about that, the reduction and the two-dimensionality of the work and the flatness. These moments that you have archived for us in your work, the art crimes, Kaepernick's quiet refusal, taking the knee, the first returning cruise liner that docked in San Francisco at the onset of COVID-19 outbreak are reanimated through your work. The moment that they inspired are brought back into the frame of remembering for those that gaze upon your work and start to think with you, or to be affected by your work. The work prompts questions. Do we remember it? Did we ever know it? As some of you come and look at this work, you might be thinking, did I ever know this? And perhaps, as is often the case with Indigenous history, why don't I? Do we remember it? If we do remember it in the same way, what does this slice of something before us tell us? What larger story does this belong to? The art does work, I want to argue, even though I'm not writing an article, but I kind of want to assert and think with you about the art is doing a kind of work at the level of memory and history, of course at the level of feeling, suggesting to us, this is important, this matters. This is part of a story, but it's also an encoding of history for us, if we want it to be. Some might just look at your work and say, that's really cool, right? And that doesn't mean that history and coolness have to be mutually exclusive at all. Julian, my dear former student, you also work with the past. With sugarcane, you were brought into a story that most Native people are reluctantly brought into. That of the very intimate, intergenerational hellscape of compulsory education. The story of Indian residential schools in Canada. This was a national imperative to make us civilized, supposedly through child capture, through forced education. How that unrolled itself was, to say the least, often very, very painful. This education was meted out, we know, through physical and sexual violence, through forced starvation, and some might argue through the dispossession of our very selves. Your film, Sugarcane, documented one community's determination to tell that story and to have that history out there. So we have here two artists who work with documents, objects, who work also collaboratively with communities to share and invoke and produce something for us. In our minds, perhaps in our bodies, in our sense of what matters. Were I to write about this, I would say in an effort towards perhaps a different historical consciousness, which is what is desperately needed in these days that we're sharing. which is what you call this collaborative project. In light of the historical commitments that course through your respective bodies of work.
Okay, I feel you put it so well. I didn't set out to do work on history. I just wanted to make animations or drawings that talk to people. But then the first time, one of the first projects was called the Simpson verdict. It was a redrawing of the reading of the verdict of the O.J. Simpson trial, and it was in New York. It was first shown that's a lucky first show in New York in Out of Time at MoMA in New York, and it was basically shown alongside history paintings. Like on the left, you had paintings by Gerhard Richter of the Baden-Meinhof terrorist group from Germany, and on the other side, you had a painting by Ruth Teumans of Condoleezza Rice. And then I realized, okay, I'm in the business of making some kind of moving history painting. And I feel this cannot be said about everything I've done, but about a good slice of my work. But then with the two projects that you also mentioned, National Anthem, and then Alcatraz is an idea, they're history paintings in some way, but there's also something slightly different, which is, I feel I've now lived most of my life in California, in the Bay Area, and I feel I have a almost physical connection to both of these. I see Alcatraz every second day when I commute to the city. Colin Kaepernick was the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. Every high school student in the Bay Area was a fan of him. So I feel I don't have the distance to this subject matter than I had maybe to O.J. Simpson or yeah. So that's the difference.
Wade Kohoida, Lewa Puskin School Kohoida from Lenape Ulu. It's good to be here today on Lenape territory. I just want to thank the Ryan Lee Gallery for having this incredible installation of Kota and my work. The whole room is like way beyond anything that anyone could ever hope for, and I just also want to say that it's a huge honor to have collaborated with Kota on this. His work is some of my favorite art out there, and to sit next to a guy who's had stuff in the MoMA when your dad is an artist and you yourself never thought that you could aspire to be an artist because it was such a terrifying thing to do when your own father, who you have a complicated relationship with, by the way, you should watch your game, is a crazy turn of events, especially today, and also to be in conversation with Professor Simpson, who I still call Professor in emails because that was our relationship from the beginning. Audra was talking about how we were in a class, I was in her class at Columbia before we started here, where it was a rare instance of the natives outnumbering the non-natives in a classroom at Columbia. Maybe it's the only time it's ever happened, I don't really know. That was a really formative part of me becoming me, and just the generosity of intellect and spirit that you've approached this work means a lot. I think there's a lot that could be said about the past and Native people and isolated history, so it's something that I've always been particularly interested in. But I think that the best way to answer that question, perhaps for me, with respect to this work of art, is that I grew up in Oakland, California. My people are not from the Bay Area, they're actually from Canada, like Audra's people. But my dad was an artist, and my mom, first she worked in newspapers back when there was a business in newspapers, and then she switched to banks, which is how we ended up in the San Francisco Bay Area. She got a job with Wells Fargo, the Stagecoach people, which Stagecoach pretty relevant to Native history. 49ers also, that was what they called the Gold Rushers, who led to the genocide of the California Indians. So, in the its history is all over the place, first of all, and yet it's invisible. And so much of, I think, the work of Native people and artists and storytellers is to try to make that history visible to others. And that imperative, I think, was instilled in me from a very young age by the community that I grew up in. The Bay Area, when I was a kid, was, among other things, a place with a very significant and vibrant Native community. People don't usually think about Oakland or the Bay Area as a Native place. Maybe some people who are familiar with like the work of Tommy Orange now might, but that came out when I was 25. So that was not the world that I was raised in. And when I was a kid, part of the way that my mom kept me connected to my community and my culture and my sense of who I am, identity, was she would bring me down to the Intertribal Friendship House in East Oakland, which is the third oldest urban Indian community center in the country. And at the Intertribal Friendship House, when I was a kid, they had powwow drum and dance practice on Thursday nights, and it's now on Wednesday nights. I know because I was just there. And at the end of powwow drum and dance practice, the entire community, when I was a kid, it's not like this anymore, but we would gather around the All Nation Singers, which was, and still is, the drum group at the Intertribal Friendship House, to sing the American Indian Movement song, which was this song that came out of this era of movement and protest and a resurgence and pride in Native political power and culture and identity. And if you're going to be a little kid who's, being raised by a white woman who's a Native dad and artist dad and kind of fucked off at that point, to be told by your community that it's your responsibility to stand here around this drum group with all of us, and if after you've heard it a few times now, you have to just try to sing it. I think that in your entire body, your entire soul, your entire person, you're being told that this is part of who you are, this is part of your history, this is part of the history of this place, and it's your responsibility to carry that forward, to carry it forward in a way that goes beyond the verbal, because the songs that we sing are often invocables. They don't have words to them. They have the spirit in them. And that was, I have the song in my ear right now, and that was a huge part of my coming of age, which I think is, just to draw it out a little bit, is a very interesting and very contemporary relationship to indigeneity, right? As I said, my people are from Western Canada, like 27 hours drive from Oakland, California. My people are not from Oakland, and yet there was this understanding that this urban community had a relationship, an Indigenous relationship to this place, and that story was perhaps one of the most important stories, not that they're ranked in any certain way, but certain stories end up having more influence over time. And this was a story that had an event that had an immense influence on Native people in the United States, Native people beyond the United States, this country, and I would say globally. This was a moment in time where Native people, watching what was going on in the world and seeing how our cultures were being laid low, our kids were being taken away to boarding schools, and we had been at this point relocated through federal policy to cities like Oakland, which is why there was a large urban Native community in Oakland, because there was a federal government effort to detach Native people from the land and send them to ghettos where they were supposed to become not Indians. And what we ended up doing is we said, no, actually, we're going to come together as Native people, and we are going to take back. We're going to start to take back what was taken from us. And what better of a symbol for the history of Native people in this country than a former federal prison in the middle of the San Francisco Bay that is windswept and you can't grow any crops on it, and it was used as a literal prison, including for Indigenous prisoners of war, including for 19 Hopi elders who refused to let their kids get taken away to a boarding school, that was then reclaimed by a bunch of Native activists, Native students, like I guess different versions of me back in the late 60s, as a symbol of Native rights, Native sovereignty, Native liberation. And I think it's worth just drawing out that if you look at the discourse around Alcatraz, Alligator Alcatraz, reopening Alcatraz today, that this is one of the most potent symbols of a particular vision for this country. Alcatraz has immense political valence today. There's a reason why the Orange Man reaches for it when he wants to talk about his mass deportation and authoritarian agenda. And there is this other vision and understanding of and relationship to this place that continues, but that is not visible to even other progressive, diverse, people in the Bay Area. There's a documentary that we watched when I was in high school at Berkeley, which is basically a little socialist republic in the middle of the United States, that talks about Bay Area in the 60s, and Alcatraz is not included. And so, I think that the intention, at least with this piece and with my work, is to try to help make some of these pieces of our history, the way we see these places and relate to this history and this culture, in the way that we see it, right? Because I think that there is actually something really powerful to, that understanding of place and icon and history.
And hidden history is also, right? Because it's not an icon to all.
Yeah.
So can we put Alcatraz as an idea on the table and orient to that in the two different, Julian, you just gave an excellent summary, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page with it, of the takeover of Alcatraz, which happened in November of 1969 and has been, and was, I don't know how many people took it over, do you? Do either of us know? But it was a so-called pan-Indian, folks from many different nations occupied Alcatraz to make a political statement about treaty rights, about self-determination, and this was eventually, they disbanded, but this was seen in some ways as the dawn of something called the Red Power movement, which you may or may not know about. I'm sure some of you, or I hope some of you have heard of the Black Power movement, but this was a time in U.S. history when folks were standing up. And this was a galvanizing event in Indian country. It motivated, one of the key spokespeople at that time was Richard Oakes, who was a Mohawk from Akwesasne, who was a student at San Francisco State University. I think Julian was making reference to Richard Oakes when he said this could have been an earlier version of me. Oakes went and occupied the site with his family and was a spokesperson. There's also an audio that goes with this that's extremely powerful, and you will hear, I don't know if we'll get to listen to it at some point, you will hear Richard Oakes making very ironic demands. But this was quite a moment across Indian country, and this idea, Alcatraz is an idea, was what Richard Oakes said. He said, Alcatraz is not just an island, it's an idea. And I want us to think about that. Clearly, you too are immersed in this as a motivating set of words. What it literally did was unroll organizing, help to unroll organizing in the Northwest, across Indian country, and it starts to move in directions that may be familiar with you. The most masculinist iteration of it would be the American Indian movement that starts to show itself in Minneapolis, the protection of Native bodies in the city, organizing against police violence. But this Alcatraz as an idea is a kind of, I want to just think with you about that, what you're thinking about, because Oakes said also, this is about the future. This isn't just about the past. I'm hammering at the past with these two, but it is also about the future, and that I think you foreground that in your essay in the catalog from this show. But do you want to think a little bit with that, or talk a little bit about that?
The Alcatraz Canoe Journey happened in 2019, and it was a commemoration of the occupation that you just described. 50-year commemoration. And then just to say why I feel proud and really proud that this is now has another life here in an art gallery, and before that at Fort Mason, is that something that the little thing that my work I feel can do is to extend the lifetime of these images. So we see them on our phones or in our news things, but now when they're here on the wall at Ryan B Gallery or in a building at Fort Mason, it just, and I feel those images, the lifetime of these images, deserves to be extended. We can get a little bit into Richard Oakes. It was so moving. Julian and Alex, his mom, are really my connection to this community. I didn't know you before working on this project. And I had no idea who would show up for the opening at Fort Mason. And the daughter of Richard Oakes was there, and the grandkids of Richard Oakes were there, and this was incredible that this collaboration was able to make these connections. And then about Richard Oakes, I obviously never met him, and I lived through what's delivered about his works, and I feel he was obviously an immensely important political activist, but to me there's also so much poetry to what he did, and I feel you can hear it in the soundtrack. The way he delivered the proclamation of Alcatraz, and I feel that's also one way why it goes so well with the music, is because it's almost like the poetry reading done about that time. So it has poetic power as it does political power.
Yeah, I just want to build on something that I really appreciate about Kota's art, and I think has been at the core of this collaboration, this piece from the beginning, which is I think that Kota understands that a protest can take lots of forms, but at its core, protest is often also a form of performance. And I think that was very core to the idea of bringing a bunch of canoes from all over the West Coast to Alcatraz Island to circle it, to reclaim it, at least for that morning or that day, or at least that day of media coverage, as this symbol of Indigenous people and our rights and our history, because it is a really important starting point for the Indigenous rights movement to this day. It was also, in addition to what Professor Simpson said, it was, in a way, the way I would describe this to the layperson is, it was like the Montgomery bus boycott of the Native rights movement. During the occupation, the federal government switched its stated policy towards Native peoples in this country from one of termination, that was literally what was called termination, to one of self-determination. This was, it's hard to overstate how important this moment was to Native people and to this entire nation, and yet it goes unknown. And I think that part of what what was so ingenious about the original occupation was that it was self-conscious of the performance of the thing. When they took over the island, Richard Oakes read a proclamation, the Alcatraz Proclamation, basically saying things to the effect of, we want to be just in our dealings with the white inhabitants of this land, and we propose to buy the island for this amount of money, which is more than was paid for Manhattan back in the 1600s, and is also more than the state of California is offering to California Indians at this moment to settle their land claims. It was a very tongue-in-cheek performance. There was an understanding about how Native people were seen and how that could be subverted to cultural and political ends. And I think that that spirit of the occupation, the performance nature of the occupation, which, by the way, many people are constantly performing. I mean, look at my goddamn outfit today. There was an understanding that was part of what we were trying to do with the canoe journey, which I just want to say that one of the many elements that is difficult about any performance is that you need people who are going to do the choreography and figure out the logistics and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, when you throw an island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, which I don't know how many people have been to the San Francisco Bay Area or know much about the Bay, but the Bay is actually a very difficult waterway. It's not like Puget Sound or other places. It's actually dangerous water. So among the many things that we had to figure out, and by we I mostly mean our committee would delegate this to my mom because she's really good at the logistics and the stuff like that, was how we could do this all safely, right? And who we needed to talk to in order to do it all safely. So I just want to also acknowledge that this piece comes out of a very grassroots, nobody was paid for it, organizing of a commemoration of a huge part of our community's history and past that was going to probably go without much commemoration, to be honest with you, if we had not done this. And in order to do that, people had to do a lot of work. And I did some work for sure, and my mom did a lot of work. And a lot of people took a lot of love and spirit out of it. So, Kota talked about how Richard Oakes' family chose to show up for the show in San Francisco, which they don't show up for every Alcatraz related thing. When we were talking about the event here, like Kota was talking about, like, can we get like Manny and his kids and the singers and all that sort of stuff over to New York in any kind of way. Which is all to say that there is an element of this. I lost my train of thought there. I'm thinking about Manny and his kids. But there's an element to this this piece that I think is about carrying forward and honoring the intention of that and spirit of the event that makes that also legible to people who otherwise would not think about Alcatraz, or probably even think about a bunch of Indians getting their canoes and circling an island in the way that we were thinking about it. And for people who struggle to this day be seen and understood by this country, and it's particularly in a moment where the symbol represents something very different. I just want to say that it was incredibly generative and refreshing to work with someone who approached it in that kind of way, and beyond that, who matched, I think, maybe exceeded that intention with the artistry, right? Like, I think that just as someone who grew up in a family that appreciated art, whose dad still makes art, for someone to do something as caring as to see you in that way, and then to put the amount of time that it takes to illustrate all of these incredible moving images and stills, is on a very basic level, an act of not just saying I see you, but also saying, like, I hear you, and I also want other people to see and hear you in that kind of a way, which is not something that, which is a beautiful thing to do for any kind of people, but I think is, a way that Native people don't often get to be seen in.
Can we segue into, sadly time is running out, but I want to just quickly ask you two about your collaboration and the impetus for the collaboration. Like, you're living in Oakland, and how did this come alive to you?
Okay, yeah, I tried to give you this, if you may.
Well, I think there's one piece of this that we should probably give voice to, and that's that part of what brought Kota and I together, my understanding is that you heard about our event from, after it had happened, from Malcolm Margolin. So there was a man who was very significant to the intellectual and cultural life of Native people in California, broadly speaking. His name was Malcolm Margolin. He was the publisher and editor of Heyday Books, which was in Berkeley, California, for many, many years, from the 70s until like the 2010s. And also published this thing called News from Native California. Like, this guy knew all of the last speakers, the dreamers, the basket makers, very significant people to the Native history of the Bay Area and the state. And he, when Kota was wondering what he should do a piece on, this is the guy who told him that he should do the Alcatraz Canoe Journey. He actually just passed away on August 20th. And so, I think that it's really important from my perspective for us to just, acknowledge and honor the fact that that's how we were brought together. And one other piece of this that I also want to name in the room is that our committee. When I went to Oakland to record the audiobook for my book that's coming out, I stopped by the Intertribal Friendship House on Wednesday night, because that's when drum and dance practices these days. And Manny was there at the drum because he's got this huge voice and he's always singing. And afterwards, we were catching up a little bit. He told me that he had taken the little Indian kids out on the bay in the little canoe that we had been gifted for the event back in 2019. It was the first time he'd done it, I think, since like COVID or something. It had been a while. And it was the same day that I had seen him. And, you know, like, if you're from the Bay Area, you know that not everybody who lives in the Bay Area gets on the water in the Bay. Like, it's a very, access to the Bay, and access to water in general is a very privileged kind of thing. And, you know, I think that it's really beautiful and significant to see these Indian kids in an urban place getting in a canoe and taking the water again and thinking about what are we going to do for the 60th anniversary of this thing, which is only 4 years away.
Yeah, Julian put it well. It was really like I also wanted to make a big shout out to Martin Margot and been thinking about him ever since I got the news of his passing. And he was also Malcolm. When I met him, he was not able to speak, but he talked through an interpreter and told me about the Alcatraz Canoe Journey with every kind of gesture that was at his disposal. And he was also the first one to roll into the Fort Mason exhibition when they opened the door. He was so dedicated to the story and to this history, and so important. And then, just like how we met, so Malcolm told me about the Alcatraz Canoe Journey, and then the Arts Commission in San Francisco contacted me and asked for an idea for something to put on the large screen in one of the new government buildings, and I thought immediately of the Alcatraz Canoe Journey, but then I didn't know how to go about it, and this was still late pandemic, and my neighbor, 2 doors down, is an Apache. Her name is Ruth Villasenor, and she's also one of the organizers of the Two-Spirit Powwow that happens in San Francisco, and I asked her. She connected me to a canoe maker named Al Frank, and Al Frank told me to call Julian, and I sent an email, and he replied and was so generous to meet up and embark on this.
I have so many more questions for them, but I want to open it up to you for questions or comments. Are you open? That you might have.
I have a question for you. Thank you guys for sharing your journey on this. It was really watching you and hearing you speak. I'm curious, for young artists, historians, orators, your younger self, what are like a few words that you would share to young people in this space?
Don't give up. It's such a. I was so. I don't know how old you are, but I was so delusional when I was 25. I was like, I'm gonna move to America and be an artist, and now, almost 30 years later, I'm still here, and I can still say that this is kind of what I'm doing, but. So many things went wrong and so many things went right, and there was so much luck involved and so much disappointments to overcome. It's just such a long road, but I'm so glad to have taken it.
I think, you know, I'm like barely not a young person anymore, so it's hard. And also, you're my mom's goddaughter, so I can start to look at you ways this question. But you know, I think that the world is very cynical today. I think it's a world rife with cynicism, which I think poses lots of problems for art and storytelling, and emotion and compassion, and you can go on. But I think also the world is cyclical, and I think that part of the beauty of so things will come back around firstly. And I also think that part of the beauty and power of Alcatraz, to Kota's point about the delusions of youth, was that like, what a fucking crazy thing for a bunch of Indian kids who were sent off to, you know, the Bay Area to become anything other than Indians to choose to do. You know, to take over a former federal prison under the provision under an arcane provision under a treaty signed in 1868 with, you know, the Kota people that said that vacant federal land could be reclaimed. You know, like what an audacious, frankly, kind of insane thing to have done, and yet it changed things for our people. It changed the world, you know. And like, as wild as that sounds like these days, that young people can change the world, there are many instances throughout our history of that being the truth. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that to just double down on what I said, like, I think believe in yourself, and believe in the power of the spirit of youth. And, you know, I would just say in Native culture, that's the spirit of youth is often something that's considered, like, by many of our communities and peoples, like sacred in certain ways, like, because there is something very powerful about being young and looking at the world in that kind of way.
And I find it really important. I've just gotten back from New Zealand, where I was looking at Pacific cultures and how they navigated using water from one place to another. And I think it's really important that there's very symbolic claiming of other, I don't know, California, Southern California, but the territory and claiming the territory and the constant movement in the images, moving from one place, but not necessarily getting there. It's just the movement forward and the resistance of the claim of other parties. So I've been looking at that in New Zealand with Tigray Amari and trying to, in some way, link that up with what's happening elsewhere along the Pacific, especially. So, very interesting.
And then the images, I mean, obviously, we help make the event happen, that these are images captured from and recorded from, but, you know, the beauty of the images, the execution of that is Kota's work, and I just like sent him those.
But you were very specific. I mean, I didn't really.
I didn't read.
Yeah. It was like, I remember emails from Julian like, can you make the water more blue? So it's not, you were not just intellectually collaborator, but also very hands-on in aesthetics.
Yeah, I like make things look a very particular way. Actually, I should say one of our editors for Sugarcane's right there. So some of the stuff that I learned also from someone who's in this room, Nathan Kumar, who has another amazing movie out there you guys should go see called Folk Tales. I'm tied to this. But to just respond to the thing, I think one contextual thing that might be helpful for people looking at this, the canoe that you see in the stills here and in many of these images you'll notice is made out of like a kind of reed. It's a tule reed. So this is actually the traditional watercraft of the people of the San Francisco Bay Area, the Ohlone people. And two of the men in the tule reed canoe are Ohlone. And one of them is actually now a San Francisco district, something or other. But that craft was the only boat representing the people from the Bay Area there that day. It was also the only craft that actually physically touched the rock. So the other canoes went around it. They went and they touched it, and then they came back. Which, by the way, put one of those in the Bay Area, in like the waters of the bay. They'd never wish they hadn't done yet. And to go out there and to touch the thing and come all the way back, we were all absolutely terrified. But they did, which was beautiful. And the images, I think, attest to that. And just as another aside, because you brought up the Pacific peoples and the context of canoes, I think in general are a very interesting thing to think about across Indigenous spaces. One time when we were in New Zealand, actually, with Sugarcane, I made a friend named Noma, who's from the Cook Islands. He's a Cook Island Maori guy. And we were talking about canoe journeys, and I told my canoe journey stories first, and then Polynesians are, first of all, they're huge, and they're, I talked about the performative nature of indigeneity. They like greet each other formally with full-on like musical theater. Like they like sing their lineage. They like give a full oratory. There's like sometimes dancing involved. There's regalia. It's a whole thing, right? And also like we obviously relate to canoes in a very significant way. They travel across the Pacific Ocean in them. So then he was telling me about how like he literally had traveled from island to island in the Pacific on the Waka. And then I was like, oh. How I haven't done that. But, you know, I just suffice it to say that there is a piece of this that is very particular to the indigeneity that is from the Bay Area, which was very intentional. And then also that there is, amongst Indigenous peoples, a relationship to the canoe, which for some of us, you know, like my people, for example, we have a story, the Shetland, a story about how we survived the Great Flood by tying our canoes to the mountain. And one people made their rope the right way, and so that's where we're descended from. Some other people made their rope the wrong way, and they floated off. We don't know where they are now. But that's all to say that the canoe, as a symbol, as a thing that requires you to work together as a mode of transportation, of movement, and to your point, is something that I don't know if all Indigenous peoples have and relate to it, but it's something that many of us have and relate to. And there's a reason why these canoe journeys have become very significant cultural, social, spiritual gatherings, you know, throughout the West Coast, and also elsewhere. There's in the East, in other parts of North America, significant movements to revive the canoe.
Something together. Is it possible to hear the audio? Maybe would we like to hear the audio together?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
For all of you, we feel this claim is just and proper, that this land should right the grants to us for as long as the British shall run and the sun shall shine. Signed, 50th of all tribes, November 1969, San Francisco, California.
Also, her aunt, if you're really into Indigenous cinema stuff, her aunt, Alanis, is like one of the most significant Indigenous filmmakers ever. Her filmography is like dozens of films long.
We, the Native Americans, reclaimed this land known as Alcatraz Island, in the name of all American Indians by right of discovery. We wish to be fair and equitable in our dealings with the Caucasian inhabitants of this land. Hereby offer the following treaty. We will purchase said Alcatraz Island for $24 with glass beads and red cloth. A precedent set by the white man's purchase of a similar island about 300 years ago. We know that $24 in trade goods for these 16 acres more than was paid when Manhattan Island was sold, but we know that land values have risen over the years. Our offer of $1.24 per acre is greater than this 47 cents per acre the white man is now paying the California Indians for their land. We will give to the inhabitants of this island a portion of that land for their own.